Let's bring in Texas Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw, who joins us now. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. So on day one, would-be Speaker McCarthy says Republicans will repeal the $80 billion that would fund 87,000 new IRS agents. I know you support that, but you almost certainly will not have 60 votes in the Senate to support such a thing. So I guess one of the questions I have is, what do you prefer your party to prioritize should you take over the House? Legislation that ultimately can pass the Senate and become law, or legislation that is appealing to the base, because that's going to be a real push and pull.
Yeah, and Jake, like you said in your monologue, there's two tracks. One is the idealized version. Okay, this is, if we were kings for a day, this is what the law would be. And I actually think that plays an important role. You've got to show people what you stand for. And then there's the things that you can actually negotiate through, and that's largely through must-sign bills like the budget process. Now, repealing funding for IRS agents in the budget, that actually I think is doable within the budget process itself. If I were to give you at least two priorities that I would certainly like to focus on, and I think there's broad consensus, it's our energy sector and it's our border. And overall, it's a theme of security. Look, it's energy security, reliable energy that has a predictable price for the rest of the year. It's economic and financial security, so generally lower taxes and less strangulatory regulations from the government that reduce investment. Again, just the basics here. Securing our freedoms, securing our parents' rights to go to school board meetings and protest, or at least get a clear idea of what the curriculum is. Mm-hmm. And border security, of course. I mean, you've got fentanyl coming across in droves, and it's killing almost 80,000 Americans a year. That's just fentanyl. Now, that's a bipartisan issue. It's got to be. I mean, that's a unifying issue. This is a common enemy that we've got to focus on. I think every American should know the names of these guys who run these cartels that are poisoning our kids. Yeah. You know, it's the #1 cause of death for young adults.
One of the first orders of business, of course, for the next Congress will be to raise the debt ceiling and to avoid a government shutdown. It's easy to be in the minority and vote in a way that will appease your base or please your base. But if House Republicans take over, you guys are in charge of keeping the government running. You guys will be in charge of keeping the government funded and to increase the debt ceiling. Do you think that there are going to be enough Republicans ready to govern?
I think so. Look, I obviously got some who will vote no matter what. And look, we're well aware of that fact. It is time to govern, and you do have to gather around the votes. Those 2 points, refunding the government and to avoid a government shutdown, and the debt ceiling vote, those are both points that, look, they're difficult political times. Nobody likes them, but they are necessary evils in a sense, because it's the only time that you can actually negotiate ways to get our budget under control. You know, we have to all agree on this, that a fiscal cliff is near, and it's difficult to predict when that happens. But we've spent a lot of money in these last couple of years, and getting our budget under control, getting our debt to GDP ratio under control has got to be a priority.
So one of the things that I look back at the last Congress, and I think there are a lot of people in this country who look and say, we want people to work together. We want Democrats and Republicans to work together. And so they were happy about the CHIPS Act. They were happy about the infrastructure bill. They were happy about the bill that Senator Cornyn worked on after the tragedy at Uvalde, because they want compromise. You talked about the fentanyl crisis, a huge problem in this country. One of the areas where there's always real difference between Democrats and Republicans is Republicans want to focus on border security, and Democrats want to focus on treatment and some of the root causes for dependency. And I'm just wondering, is there a willingness, will there be a willingness, assuming you take over, the Republicans take over, and you know, you're running for chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, if you take over in that position, if you win that role, is there a willingness to, even if you don't want to work with the Democrats in the House, to reach out to the Democrats in the Senate whose votes you're going to need? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
We will definitely be the first ones to try that. I will do whatever it takes to secure our border. And it's been difficult working with Democrats on this issue. And I got to say, Democrat politicians, we should be specific in how we say that, because you talk to Democrats in Texas, they want the border secure. South Texas is turning red, going to, I think, vote in some Republican candidates just because of the border crisis. And so, this is a Democrat politician issue for some reason. And yeah, they do give these slippery arguments about, well, we want to address root causes. We can't just, secure. It's not humane to secure the border. Well, it's not humane to let everyone cut the line when there's millions of people trying to do it the right way. It's not humane when Border Patrol is fishing dead bodies out of the river. It's not humane with all this human smuggling. It's not humane when the cartels are enriched by this crisis, facilitating it and pushing fentanyl across. And so this has got to be bipartisan, and enough has got to be enough. And look, this is why I think it's actually important for us to also talk about the cartels. I mean, this is a common enemy, all right? This is a common enemy that is lacing street drugs with poison and killing nearly 80,000 Americans a year. We should be funding a task force that directly targets this. Why aren't we seeing big arrests for these cartel members that are not only pushing fentanyl across, but actively facilitating the border crisis? They have every one of those people pay them like $300 before they cross the river. Yeah, this is an active violation of our state sovereignty and national security.
I hear you, but I have to say something you just said doesn't fill me with confidence about the effort to find common ground, because you referred to Democrats talking about root causes of dependency issues as slippery arguments. And, I have to say, knowing a little bit about the fentanyl crisis and the opioid crisis, I don't know that it's a slippery crisis, maybe a slippery argument. I mean, I think maybe you disagree with their approach to border security, et cetera, but I think that is part of the situation. And in fact, if you look at President Trump's task force, run by Chris Christie and Kellyanne Conway, talking about opioids, they talked a lot about root causes for drug dependency as well. It's not a cop. I understand that you want to focus on the security part of it.
I think we're talking about two different things.
Yeah.
No, we're talking about two different things. When I was referring to their arguments about root causes, what they're often referring to is root causes in Guatemala, root causes in Honduras, which is incredibly difficult for us to solve. Okay, so but I totally agree with tackling the fentanyl crisis at all angles, including root causes. There's actually very little disagreement there. There's been a lot of bipartisan legislation, in fact, on dealing with opioids at the treatment level, But again, the fentanyl crisis is a little different than opioids, and I distinguish between these two things, because people are addicted to opioids. They know they're taking opioids. They know they're taking heroin. What they might not know is that somebody laced fentanyl in some back alley lab into that heroin or into that cocaine or into that Adderall. That is poisoning. And this has got to be a unifying call for Americans to say, look, there are a couple organizations that are directly responsible for this. They're right on the southern side of our border. They're well armed. They're well funded, and we don't even talk about them like they're an enemy of the state. This has got to be unifying.
Yeah, no, and we've covered the fentanyl crisis, and as you probably know, your former colleague, Congressman Ted Deutsch, lost a nephew to it, a kid that thought he was just taking some over-the-counter fine supplement, and it had fentanyl in it. Horrible tragedy, and too common. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, thank you so much. Perhaps next time I see you, I'll be calling you Mr. Chairman. We'll see. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Hope so. Thanks, Jake.